He walked in with a delivery bag and a smile. Just another food service worker bringing lunch to the SEAL training facility. The candidates barely looked up from their meal prep, too focused on refueling for the afternoon's brutal training schedule. But when Marcus Chen stumbled, and the heavy tray of food went flying, something extraordinary happened. In one fluid motion, the delivery man rolled forward, caught the falling tray midair, and landed in a perfect tactical stance without spilling a single item. The mess hall went silent. Because that wasn't the move of someone who delivered sandwiches for a living. That was the reaction of someone trained to respond to chaos with deadly precision. And suddenly, everyone realized they'd been served by a ghost. Because in that split second, they saw through the disguise. Behind the apron was someone who had been there, in chaos, in combat, in control. And just like that, the question wasn't who he was, it was what he had once been. The SEALs had just been served lunch by a ghost of war. Welcome to Silent Salute, where we discover that the most dangerous warriors often hide behind the most ordinary jobs. Before we continue this incredible story, tell us in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you believe heroes can be found in the most unexpected places, hit that subscribe button to support our channel. We're honored to share these remarkable stories with you. Tony Vasquez had been delivering meals to military installations around San Diego for 8 years. His catering company, Pacific Fresh Foods, specialized in providing high-quality meals to facilities that demanded both nutrition and convenience for personnel operating on demanding schedules. The business had grown from a single delivery truck to a fleet of vehicles serving bases throughout Southern California. The contract with Naval Amphibious Base Coronado was one of Tony's favorites, both professionally and personally. The SEAL training candidates were always polite, always grateful for good food, and they understood the importance of proper nutrition during intense physical training. Plus, the base was well organized, security was professional, payment was always prompt, and the work kept him connected to a community he deeply respected. What the SEALs didn't know was that Tony understood their training better than most civilians ever could. Before starting his catering business, he'd served 8 years as an Army Ranger, including 4 combat deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. He'd been a member of the 75th Ranger Regiment, participating in direct action missions, reconnaissance operations, and classified assignments that had tested every aspect of his physical and mental capabilities. Tony had left military service not from any dissatisfaction with the work or the people, but because he'd wanted to start a family and build a business that would let him stay home with his wife Maria and their 2 young children. The transition from active combat operations to civilian entrepreneurship had been challenging, but he'd found purpose in serving the military community through his business rather than through continued active duty. He'd chosen food service deliberately. It was honest work that served people he respected, and it kept him connected to the military community without the dangers and family separations that came with active duty deployment cycles. He could support warriors without being one himself anymore, contributing to their mission readiness through proper nutrition rather than through shared combat operations. Tony's routine at the SEAL base was well-established and efficient. Arrive at 1,130 hours, check in with security at the main gate, proceed to designated delivery areas, unload fresh meals, and collect empty containers from the previous day's service, complete all paperwork, and depart by 1,200 hours. Simple, professional, and designed to minimize disruption to training operations. The SEALs knew him as Tony, a reliable contractor who provided excellent food on schedule without any of the attitude or complications that sometimes came with civilian service providers. He was polite but not chatty, professional but not overly military in bearing. Just a middle-aged businessman who happened to serve military installations with unusual efficiency and attention to detail. What they couldn't see was how Tony observed their training with the eye of someone who'd been through his own version of elite military conditioning. He noticed technique details, evaluated physical conditioning standards, assessed leadership dynamics among candidates and instructors, and unconsciously compared what he saw to his own experiences in Ranger training and combat operations. Not out of nosiness or professional criticism, but from the automatic interest of someone who understood what they were trying to achieve. Class 349 was 6 weeks into BUD/S training. at the point where the initial shock of military conditioning was giving way to the deeper challenges of mental toughness and team cohesion. 22 candidates remained from the original class of 38, and the upcoming Hell Week would likely eliminate several more from the program. Tony had been watching this particular class with professional interest. The candidates showed good physical conditioning and reasonable teamwork skills, but he'd noticed some concerning patterns in their group dynamics during meal times. A few individuals were starting to isolate themselves, focusing on personal performance rather than unit cohesion. In Tony's experience from Ranger training, that was often a precursor to voluntary withdrawal from elite military programs. Lieutenant Marcus Chun was one of the candidates Tony had been observing with particular concern. A former college athlete with impressive physical capabilities, Chun had consistently performed well in individual challenges but seemed to struggle with the collaborative aspects of SEAL training. During meals, Chun sat apart from his classmates, ate quickly without conversation, and generally projected the kind of self-focused intensity that Tony remembered from Rangers who eventually couldn't handle the team-oriented nature of special operations. On this particular Tuesday morning, Tony was delivering what the candidates called Hell Week prep meals, high-calorie, high-protein dishes designed to help them build energy reserves for the most grueling phase of SEAL training. The menu included grilled chicken with quinoa, salmon with sweet potatoes, lean beef with brown rice, and various nutritional supplements that would help sustain them through 5.5 days of continuous training with minimal sleep. Tony was setting up the serving area in the candidates' mess hall when he noticed unusual tension among the group. Several candidates were arguing quietly about equipment assignments, and there seemed to be more individual stress and less team cohesion than he'd observed in previous weeks. The atmosphere felt brittle, like a unit on the verge of fracturing under pressure. Lieutenant Chun was standing apart from the group, reviewing training notes while other candidates helped set up for the meal. His isolation from team activities was becoming more pronounced, and Tony could see the frustration building in other candidates who were trying to maintain unit solidarity. As Tony arranged the serving trays, he overheard fragments of conversation that confirmed his assessment of the group dynamics. Some candidates were questioning Chin's commitment to team success, while others were defending his individual performance standards. The division was subtle but growing, exactly the kind of issue that could destroy a unit's effectiveness during Hell Week. Tony had seen this pattern before during his own military service. Elite units were constantly balancing individual excellence with team cohesion, and sometimes the pressure to perform personally conflicted with the need to support teammates. Rangers who couldn't resolve that tension usually didn't make it through the selection process. As candidates began lining up for their meal, Tony noticed Chun was struggling to balance his training notebook, water bottle, and meal tray while continuing to review his notes. The lieutenant was clearly trying to maximize every minute for individual preparation, but his multitasking was creating practical problems. That's when it happened. Chun, focused on his notebook rather than his physical surroundings, misjudged the distance to a table and caught his foot on a chair leg. The collision sent him stumbling forward, and his fully loaded meal tray went flying through the air. 20 pounds of carefully prepared food, along with plates, utensils, and a ceramic mug, sailed toward the floor in a trajectory that would have resulted in a spectacular mess and probably some cuts from broken dishware. But the tray never hit the ground. In a movement so fast and fluid it seemed to defy physics, Tony rolled forward from his position at the serving counter. His body moved with the controlled precision of someone reacting to incoming fire rather than a dining room accident. He dove under the falling tray, caught it in both hands while still in motion, and completed a tactical roll that brought him to his feet in a perfect combat stance. Not a single item had spilled. Not one plate had broken. The tray was balanced perfectly in Tony's hands as if nothing unusual had happened, except that he was now standing 15 feet from where he'd started, having moved through the air like a precision weapon rather than a middle-aged food service contractor. The mess hall was completely silent. Every SEAL candidate and instructor in the room was staring at Tony with expressions ranging from amazement to suspicion, because what they'd just witnessed wasn't the reflex of a civilian trying to prevent a mess. It was the reaction of someone trained to respond to chaos with deadly accuracy and split-second timing. Chief Petty Officer Williams, the senior instructor supervising the meal, was the first to recover his voice. What the hell was that? Tony looked around at the faces staring at him and realized his carefully maintained civilian cover had just been completely blown. For 8 years, he'd successfully projected the image of a businessman who happened to serve military installations. Now, in the space of 3 seconds, he demonstrated combat reflexes that no amount of civilian explanation could rationalize. "Sorry about that," Tony said, trying to return to his role as a food service contractor. "Didn't want you guys to lose your lunch." But Williams wasn't buying the casual explanation. As a veteran SEAL instructor, he'd worked with the most elite warriors in the world, and he knew the difference between athletic ability and combat training. What Tony had just demonstrated was the latter. "Sir," Williams said, his tone shifting from casual to professional. "That was military training. Advanced military training." Tony set Chin's rescued tray on the nearest table and looked around at the candidates who were still staring at him. He could see the questions in their eyes, the professional curiosity of warriors trying to identify one of their own. "Just good reflexes," Tony replied. But even he could hear how unconvincing that sounded. Lieutenant Chun, who had witnessed Tony's spectacular save of his meal from the closest vantage point, stepped forward. "Sir, that was a tactical role. Perfect form, perfect timing, perfect situational awareness. That's not reflexes, that's training." Tony realized that any attempt to maintain his civilian cover would now seem ridiculous. The demonstration had been too precise, too obviously military, too clearly the product of years of elite training to be explained away as natural ability or good luck. "All right," Tony said finally. "You got me." Chief Williams immediately recognized that they were dealing with someone who'd received significant military training. But the level of skill Tony had demonstrated suggested something beyond conventional service. "Sir, if you don't mind me asking, what's your background?" Tony glanced around the mess hall, noting that word of the incident was spreading to other training staff and candidates. His quiet years of civilian anonymity were clearly over, and he'd have to decide how much of his military history he was willing to reveal. "Army," Tony said simply. "Did my time, got out, started a business." But Williams pressed for more detail. "Sir, with respect, what you just demonstrated wasn't basic Army training. That was special operations level tactical movement." Tony could see that evasion wasn't going to work with this audience. SEALs were trained to gather intelligence, and they wouldn't be satisfied with vague answers about his military background. 75th Ranger Regiment, Tony admitted. 8 years active duty for combat deployments. The reaction was immediate. Rangers were respected throughout the special operations community as elite light infantry specialists. The 75th Ranger Regiment was where the Army sent soldiers who needed to be ready for immediate deployment to the world's most dangerous places. "Which deployments?" Williams asked, his professional curiosity now fully engaged. Tony listed his service history. Iraq 2004 to 2005, Afghanistan 2006 to 2007, Iraq again 2008, Afghanistan 2009 to 2010. Lieutenant Chun, who was still standing near Tony with his rescued meal tray, realized he was talking to someone who'd spent 4 years in active combat with one of the Army's most elite units. "Sir, what was your MLS?" Chun asked, using the military term for job specialty. 11B, Tony replied. "Infantry. But I also qualified as a Ranger School instructor and did some work with other special operations units when they needed additional personnel." Williams was beginning to understand that Tony's casual appearance as a food service contractor concealed a much more significant military background. Rangers who served as instructors and worked with other special operations units were typically among the most elite soldiers in the Army. "Mr. Vasquez," Williams said, reading Tony's name from his delivery paperwork, "how long have you been delivering meals to this base?" 8 years, Tony replied. "Since I got out and started my business." "And in 8 years, you never mentioned your Ranger background." Tony's smile was rueful. "Chief, I came here to serve good food and support your mission. I didn't think my resume was relevant to meal delivery." But Williams was thinking about the implications of having had an experienced special operations veteran observing SEAL training for 8 years without anyone in the command knowing about his background. "Sir, have you been evaluating our candidates during your deliveries?" The question caught Tony off guard. He'd been careful to maintain professional boundaries during his visits, But he couldn't deny that his military experience colored how he observed the training operations. Not evaluating, Tony said carefully. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't notice things. Old habits from when situational awareness was a survival skill. Williams exchanged glances with the other instructors who'd gathered to understand what had happened. They were dealing with someone who'd been conducting informal reconnaissance of their training program for years, someone whose insights could be valuable if they could convince him to share them. What kinds of things have you noticed? Williams asked. Tony hesitated. He'd spent 8 years maintaining strict boundaries between his business relationship with the base and his personal observations about their training methods. Crossing that line would change everything about his relationship with the SEAL community. Chief, I'm here to deliver food, not to critique your training program. But Lieutenant Chun, who was still trying to process how his clumsiness had revealed a ranger's presence, spoke up. Sir, if you've been watching our training for 8 years, you must have some observations about what works and what doesn't. Tony looked around at the candidates, noting their genuine interest in his perspective. These were serious warriors in training, not casual military enthusiasts. If his observations could help them succeed, maybe it was worth sharing some of his insights. All right, Tony said, making a decision that would change his relationship with the base permanently. But this stays in this room, and I'm speaking as a former ranger, not as a meal delivery contractor. Williams nodded agreement. Understood. Tony gestured toward the candidates in the mess hall. Your physical training is excellent. Your individual skill development is as good as anything I saw in the regiment. But your team cohesion has been declining over the past 2 weeks. The observation caught Williams by surprise. What makes you say that? I've been watching how candidates interact during meals, Tony explained. 2 weeks ago, they sat together, shared food, helped each other with equipment. Now they're eating in smaller groups, focusing on individual preparation rather than team building. Tony pointed toward Lieutenant Chun. Chun's a perfect example. Excellent individual performer, but he's isolated himself from the team. In ranger training, that's usually a warning sign that someone's about to quit or get dropped from the program. Chun looked defensive. Sir, I'm just trying to maximize my preparation time. Lieutenant, Tony replied, I understand the impulse. But in combat, individual excellence means nothing if you can't function as part of a team. The enemy doesn't care how fast you can run or how many push-ups you can do. They care whether your unit can operate effectively under stress. Williams was impressed by the accuracy of Tony's observations. The training staff had been noticing similar issues but hadn't identified the specific behavioral patterns that were causing team cohesion problems. What would you recommend? Williams asked. Tony considered the question carefully. In ranger training, when we saw this kind of isolation developing, we'd create scenarios that forced candidates to depend on each other for success. Not just physical challenges, but problems that required different people's strengths to solve. He gestured around the mess hall. You could start here. Instead of individual meal times, create team-based food preparation and cleanup responsibilities. Make candidates responsible for each other's nutrition and hydration. Build interdependence into routine activities. Lieutenant Chun was listening intently. Sir, would that really make a difference in combat performance? Lieutenant, in my experience, the Rangers who succeeded in combat were the ones who understood that their survival depended on their teammates' success. Individual heroes get killed. Teams come home. Tony's words carried the weight of someone who'd learned these lessons through experience rather than theory. The candidates could hear the difference between academic knowledge and practical wisdom earned through years of dangerous missions. Williams made a decision. Mr. Vasquez, would you be willing to share more of your observations with our training staff? Officially, Tony knew that agreeing would mean the end of his quiet anonymity, but he also understood that his insights could help these candidates become better warriors and potentially save lives in future combat operations. Chief, if you think it would help these candidates succeed, I'm willing to contribute whatever I can. What happened next surprised everyone, including Tony. Chief Williams immediately called for an impromptu training staff meeting, and within 30 minutes, Tony found himself in a conference room with the senior SEAL instructors responsible for Class 349's development. Commander Jake Stevens, the overall BUD/S training director, had been briefed on the situation and wanted to understand exactly who they'd been unknowingly hosting for 8 years. Mr. Vasquez, Stevens began. Chief Williams tells me you're a former ranger with significant combat experience who's been observing our training operations for nearly a decade. Yes, sir, Tony replied. Though I should clarify that my observations were incidental to my business relationship with the base. I wasn't conducting any kind of formal assessment. Stevens reviewed Tony's military file, which had been quickly retrieved from personnel databases. 4 combat deployments, Ranger School Instructor Qualification, Bronze Star with V device, Purple Heart, Combat Infantry Badge. This is an impressive record. Tony nodded acknowledgement, but didn't elaborate. He'd learned long ago that his military decorations were less important than the lessons he'd taken from the experiences that earned them. More importantly, Stevens continued, you've been watching SEAL candidates under training stress for 8 years. That's a unique perspective that could be valuable to our program development. Stevens explained that the SEAL Training Command was constantly looking for ways to improve their selection and development processes. Having an experienced special operations veteran who'd observed hundreds of candidates could provide insights that internal staff might miss. We'd like to offer you a consulting position, Stevens said. Formal recognition of the analysis you've already been conducting informally. Tony was stunned. Sir, I'm a food service contractor. I don't have any credentials as a training analyst. Mr. Vasquez, you have 8 years of combat experience and 8 years of observing our candidates. That's better credentials than most civilian consultants can offer. Stevens outlined the proposal. Tony would continue his meal delivery services, but would also provide regular assessments of candidate performance and training effectiveness. His insights would be incorporated into official training reviews and used to improve the overall BUD/S program. The position would come with appropriate security clearances and compensation, Stevens added. We're not asking you to give up your business. We're asking you to formalize the contribution you're already making. Before Tony could respond, Lieutenant Chin spoke up from where he'd been quietly listening to the conversation. Sir, may I say something? Stevens nodded permission. Commander, Mr. Vasquez just diagnosed a problem with our class dynamics that I didn't even realize existed. He identified specific behavioral patterns and offered practical solutions based on his experience. If he's been watching us for 8 years and can provide that kind of insight, I think we'd be crazy not to listen to him. Other candidates murmured agreement. Word of Tony's spectacular catch and subsequent revelations had spread throughout the class, and they were eager to learn from someone who'd successfully completed his own elite military training and multiple combat deployments. Stevens was impressed by the candidate's enthusiasm but wanted to understand Tony's perspective on the proposal. Mr. Vasquez, what's your assessment of our training effectiveness compared to your own experience in Ranger selection? Tony considered the question carefully. Sir, your physical conditioning standards are excellent, probably superior to what we had in the regiment. Your individual skill development is world-class, but I think you could improve team building and mental resilience training. How so? Rangers succeed because they learn to think collectively under stress. SEALs operate in smaller units with even greater independence requirements. Your candidates need more training in distributed leadership and mutual dependency. Tony's analysis was exactly the kind of insight Stevens had been hoping to gain from external evaluation of their program. Mr. Vasquez, I'm going to make this formal. We're offering you a position as Senior Training Analyst for BUD/S operations. You'll continue your business relationship with the base, but you'll also provide official assessment and recommendations for program improvement. Tony looked around the room at the faces of SEAL instructors and candidates who were waiting for his answer. These were serious warriors who dedicated their lives to serving something bigger than themselves. If his experience could help them become more effective, he had an obligation to contribute. Sir, I accept the position, but I have one condition. What's that? I want to work directly with candidates who are struggling, not just to evaluate them, but to help them succeed if possible. Stevens smiled. Mr. Vasquez, I think that arrangement will work perfectly. Lieutenant Chun, who had inadvertently started this entire conversation by dropping his meal tray, approached Tony after the meeting concluded. Sir, I owe you an apology, Chun said, and not just for making you save my lunch. What kind of apology, Lieutenant? I've been so focused on individual performance that I forgot why I wanted to become a SEAL in the first place. It wasn't about proving I was the strongest or fastest. It was about serving with the best team in the world. Tony nodded understanding. Lieutenant, that's a lesson most of us have to learn the hard way. The fact that you figured it out during training instead of during combat puts you ahead of where I was at your age. Chen extended his hand. Sir, thank you for the lesson. And for catching my tray. Tony shook the young officer's hand. Lieutenant, thank you for giving me a reason to stop pretending I was just a food service contractor. Tony's transition from anonymous meal delivery contractor to official training analyst transformed not just his relationship with the SEAL community, but the entire approach to candidate evaluation and development at BUD/S. His first official report identified specific patterns in candidate behavior that predicted success or failure with accuracy that surprised even experienced instructors. More importantly, his recommendations for improving team cohesion and mental resilience training were immediately implemented and showed measurable results. Class 349 became a case study in the effectiveness of Tony's analytical methods. Under his guidance, the candidates developed stronger team bonds and better collective problem-solving abilities. Lieutenant Chun, in particular, transformed from an isolated individual performer into a team leader who helped other candidates succeed. The class graduated with unusual cohesion and was later recognized for exceptional performance during their first operational deployment. Several graduates credited Tony's insights with helping them understand the difference between individual excellence and team effectiveness. Tony's business, Pacific Fresh Foods, continued to serve military installations throughout Southern California, but now with the added dimension of his analytical consulting work. His unique combination of combat experience and long-term observation skills made him valuable to training commands throughout the special operations community. More importantly, Tony found new purpose in his work that went beyond successful business operations. He was contributing to the development of warriors who would protect American interests around the world, using lessons learned through his own service to help the next generation succeed. His story spread throughout the military community as an example of how valuable contributions could come from unexpected sources. The food service contractor who caught a falling tray became a legend, not for his reflexes, but for his dedication to helping others achieve their potential. Lieutenant Chun completed SEAL training and went on to lead his own teams in combat operations. He frequently credited Tony's early intervention with helping him understand the importance of collective success over individual achievement. Years later, as a senior officer, Chun would use Tony's example when mentoring his own junior personnel. Tony's analytical methods were eventually adopted by other special operations training facilities, and he was invited to speak at military leadership conferences about the importance of continuous observation and external perspective in program development. But perhaps Tony's greatest achievement was proving that service to the military community didn't require wearing a uniform. His commitment to supporting warriors through his business and his analytical insights demonstrated that there were many ways to contribute to the mission of protecting American freedoms. The mess hall where Tony had first revealed his background became a symbol of how extraordinary capabilities could hide behind ordinary appearances. Candidates were regularly reminded that the most valuable lessons often came from unexpected sources, and that every person they encountered might have insights worth learning. Tony continued his dual role as businessman and analyst for many years, eventually training other veterans to provide similar services to military installations. His model of combining civilian enterprise with military consulting became a template for veteran entrepreneurs who wanted to maintain their connection to the military community. His legacy lived on in the hundreds of SEAL candidates who benefited from his insights, the training improvements that resulted from his recommendations, and the broader understanding that effective military development required diverse perspectives and continuous evaluation. The reflexes that had saved Lieutenant Chen's lunch tray were just the beginning. Tony's real contribution was demonstrating that the warrior spirit could find expression in many forms, and that the most effective service often happened quietly, behind the scenes, through daily dedication to helping others succeed. This story was brought to you by Silent Salute. Before we leave you today, here's our question. Have you ever discovered that someone in an ordinary job was hiding extraordinary skills and experience? Someone whose unassuming appearance concealed capabilities that could change how you understood their work? Tell us in the comments about the hidden experts in your own life who've surprised you with their depth of knowledge and experience. And if you believe that true expertise often hides behind humble service, hit that subscribe button to support our channel. Every story reminds us that the most valuable people are often those who serve quietly without seeking recognition, and that extraordinary capabilities can emerge when we least expect them. We'll see you in the next one.